Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about the Doctor Who episode, The Angels Take Manhattan. This is another Doctor Who story set in New York, and boy, after what we saw with the last Doctor Who story from the David Tennant era set in New York, boy is this a nice improvement, if for no other reason than we don't have to listen to some sort of horrible American accent that makes me want to pour ground glass in my ears. In a way, I kind of like to think that this episode is an apology for that, but because what we're to get to listen here, while at times um, need maybe overly adherent to the corniness inherent in the PI genre, well, it definitely doesn't make me want to kick my screen. Let's put it that way. So anyway, let's get right into this episode. Now, overall, I do like this episode. I thought that this was a very satisfying send off for Amy and Rory, but while it works very well on an emotional level, in terms of storytelling and logic, I think this episode falls more than a little short. So let's dive right in talking about the story of the private investigator, whose name I really can't even actually be bothered to remember because he's not a terribly important character. Now, he's hired by this crime boss who goes by the name of Grail in a completely unsubtle way of indicating, hey, this guy likes to collect artifacts of historical importance. Now, granted, this is also something that's not exactly unknown in the private eye genre. I mean, for God's sakes, Mike Hammer, Magnum PI. But still, I was rolling my eyes at that a little bit. So the first question that I have is, why did Grail hire this guy in the first place? If he has a weeping angel chained up in his office, he must seem to have some reasonable idea of what's going on. So, what does he exactly expect this PI to find out, especially when this guy doesn't know that these statues have these superpowers? I mean, really, he's basically not sending somebody out to find out what's going on. He's really just kind of throwing the angels a stake. And again, why he's doing this doesn't make sense because it's made quite clear in the episode that the angels consider him to be their enemy. He has captured and has essentially maimed one of their own. So again, he has no reason to want to help the angels in any way. So again, him doing that makes absolutely no sense. And speaking of stuff that makes absolutely no sense, this episode tells us that the angels apparently can possess statues that already exist. Now, okay, I was under the understanding, and if I'm wrong about this, correct me, that the whole weeping angels thing is the statue's natural form when someone is looking at them. Apart from the scary blah kind of face. Yeah, so, and now granted, we did see them controlling uh, using a human's voice in a previous episode, but that was kind of a little off their MO. The idea of them possessing existing statues that doesn't really seem to jive with what we've learned before. And frankly, it seems a very strange thing. I mean, maybe they can do that in addition to their normal abilities, but still, I think this could have been made much clearer. And if they do actually just possess existing statues, well, what happens if they were to deal with a culture or a species that doesn't believe in creating statues that resemble living beings? Like, take, for example, Islamic art. Islamic art forbids depicting humans or living creatures. That's why Islamic art is highly geometric. So if the angels were trying to go to a planet where they just simply don't do that, are they going to have to try and possess a big ass cube statue or monument or something like that and try and kill people that way? I mean, the idea of a big cube or something like that just sort of sneaking up behind you whenever you're not looking at it isn't particularly terrifying. Now, granted, the idea of the angels possessing the Statue of Liberty, like we see the 2 times in this episode, I mean, it's pretty badass. I mean, it's genuinely frightening. But it doesn't make sense. I mean, the good folks on TV Tropes call it quite accurately refuge and audacity, because it is one of the rules of the angels is they cannot move if you are looking at them. Now you have to think in a city of millions of people like New York that at some point there is not somebody somewhere looking at the Statue of Liberty. And that's just in New York proper. Imagine the people who could see that thing from like New Jersey or from the harbor or whatever. Seriously, it's just unthinkable that there is not at every moment of the day somebody looking at the Statue of Liberty, even in 1938. And if that's the case, what exactly good is the statue moving over there towards the building in the middle of New York, hinted to be somewhere around Battery Park, if I remember correctly? I mean, how is it going to move? If it's the Statue of Liberty suddenly appears in mainland Manhattan, even if it is at the middle of the night, how the hell is half of New York not immediately going to notice this? Kind of wish there was something a little stronger in that than water right at this particular moment. But anyway, why does Grail, if that's the case, if the Weeping Angels can possess statues, why in the name of all that is holy does Grail have a statue that is not secured just a couple of feet from his desk? And speaking of which, Grail is apparently meeting with the private investigator in his home. Now, he keeps looking out the window at these 2 statues, checking to see, I guess, that they're not coming to kill him. If this guy is indeed in his own home, why does he not know automatically what those statues look like? I mean, he generally seems surprised when the statues are different. And if this is right at his home, why did he just send some of his goons out there to chain the things down? I mean, seriously, this guy's actions never, ever make sense. And speaking of Grail doing stuff that makes sense, first of all, there's no way that a crime boss in 1938 New York, a white crime boss in 1938 New York, is going to have a black right-hand man without raising some serious issues with the other criminals. Okay, gangs today are still, for the most part, very racially separated. Now think about how that must have been in 1938. And let's not kid that there were certainly, minority crime gangs in New York. I mean, there was even a movie not too long ago about black gangsters back in the 1920s. The name of the movie escapes me at the moment, but yeah, that wouldn't fly in 1938 New York, or at the very least, it would not go over terribly well. But you know what? That's not terribly important. What is terribly important is that for no reason they decide to throw Rory to the baby angels before they bother to determine whether or not they can use him as leverage against Melody. Seriously, they don't even ask her, so who's this guy to you? And, if that's the case, then why bother kidnapping Rory in the first place? I mean, are you going to kidnapping him just because he was there when you decided to snatch River? Well, you know what? Why couldn't you have just grabbed River a couple of feet down the road? Or, you know what? I'm tired of talking about this. Everything involving Grail is stupid. It's stupid. This is horribly written stuff. And honestly, Doctor Who can do much better than this. Okay. Let's talk about some of the good stuff. First of all, I really enjoyed just seeing Amy, Rory, and the Doctor just chilling out in Central Park in New York. I believe one of the things you can see in the background is Oh darn, I forget. It's the name. I'm pretty sure you can see a really famous New York hotel in the background. And I can't remember for the life of me what it's called at this moment. And I loved when the Doctor put on Amy's glasses because it made him look so much like the way Peter Parker is depicted in like the 1960s Spider-Man comics. If you ever go and look back at the a lot of those original Silver Age Spider-Man stories. Now, again, this is something that's really just heavily to me, but I found that absolutely hilarious. And I do like that there was some acknowledgement that the Ponds have physically aged since the Doctor first really re-entered their lives back in the 11th hour. Now, granted, obviously it hasn't been 10 years for the actors, but what are you going to do? We did get, of course, to see one big aged makeup scene, but I honestly wasn't terribly impressed by that scene, so I think I'm just going to leave it at that. But I do like that they really did, in a lot of ways, capture the essence of New York, or at least New York of that time, fairly well. And going back to that scene in the park, honestly, I really feel like kicking myself for not thinking of River immediately as soon as it turned out that the name of the private investigator was Melody Malone. I mean, Melody. Now, granted, it's also a little strange that the Doctor seems to just sort of brush things turning up in his pockets off. And now, granted, the Doctor, this is somebody who's especially actually is known for keeping bizarre things in his pockets during some of his earlier incarnations. But still, you'd think that if he's wearing the same jacket that we always see him wearing, he wouldn't find that a little strange. And I mean, look at what we saw earlier with Asylum of the Daleks. The Doctor seriously takes note that someone is able to get him a message, but apparently he can't be bothered to keep track of what's actually in his pockets. The pockets of the clothes that he apparently wears every day. I'm sorry, Stephen Moffat. You're really asking me to stretch a lot this episode in terms of what I'm willing to hand wave away. But anyway, speaking of nods to the previous Doctors, timey-wimey. Boy, I got such a kick out of that. I always love the nods to the previous Doctors. And we have, as I said, like last week's episode was really the 11th Doctor and a 3rd Doctor adventure. And while I definitely have enjoyed the nods to Doctors 1 through 7, actually seeing nods to Doctors 8 through 10, we haven't really seen too much of that lately. And it is, I think, good that they're willing to, do those shoutouts. To just kind of, I guess, put the more modern Doctors who have passed on the same shelf as the previous Doctors. Now, maybe doing that might not sit so well with some of the newer fans, but as somebody who has literally been a Doctor Who fan for more than half my life, I'm perfectly okay with that. Because ultimately, I don't think we should really set a divide between, for lack of a better term, classic Who Doctors and modern Who Doctors, because they are all the Doctor. They are all great characters. They have all made the legacy of Doctor Who richer in their own ways. Now, of course, it's natural that some people are going to prefer various incarnations of the Doctor over another. But I don't like the idea of saying, I think what I'm trying to say here is it's okay to prefer certain Doctors over others. I just don't like the idea of treating other Doctors as inferior Doctors. Because they've all been good Doctors. They've all just simply brought different things to the table that may not appeal to various fans' tastes. And you know what? I could really go on more about that, but I don't really think it's necessary. I think I've said enough. And we have a lot more to talk about. So, let's talk about River, since I brought her up not too long ago. I I do think that given what's happening in this episode, it makes perfect sense that she be there. I mean, she is Rory and Amy's daughter. She is the doctor's wife. And if you're going to say goodbye to the Ponds, then, River does need to be there. Because we never did really get too awful much with her and her parents really relating strongly. And to see her almost in tears at knowing what's going to happen with her father, with him being sent back in time, that really did add some much needed connection between these two. It does tell us that despite being separated from them for so much of her life, despite everything that's happened, those are her parents to her. Those are the only, aside from the doctor, the only people in her life that she can really count on. And of course, this is an extraordinarily emotional departure for the doctor as well. Amy and Rory, in a way, do join Chameleon and Adric and Katerina on the list of companions who have died. Now, granted, the other companions more or less sacrificed themselves, but still, the Doctor is literally left staring at their graves, and it is made very clear to us. And this is something I've always wondered about. Does the Doctor really follow up on the lives of his companions? Now, it was certainly hinted at with the Brigadier that he doesn't, but here it's made clear that the Doctor really, once they leave his life, doesn't check in on them. But that's also understandable, because really, how painful would it be to just read the future of someone that you care about and know when and where they died and under what circumstances? I suppose for some people that might be in a way comforting to know that they lived long lives, that they lived happily, and that they passed away peacefully, but the way that Amy and Rory did, but still, that's not always a guarantee. And again, River's not the only one who's losing family here. The Ponds are his in-laws, and Amy certainly was interested in being more than just family with the Doctor for quite a long time. But in terms of real family, the Doctor hasn't had any since his first incarnation. And he gave that person up. He gave his own granddaughter Susan up to be with the man she loved. And if you go back and watch that scene with the first Doctor, it's just heartbreaking. And here, the Doctor isn't even really given a choice. Amy and Rory are taken from him by the angels, and he can't do anything about it. And the really heartbreaking thing is, it seemed like he was so close. He was so close to saving them, to saving the day yet again, like he always does. But still, at the end of the day, Amy and Rory did end up together. They did end up happy. They did end up with each other. Rory got to be with the girl he's loved his whole life, and Amy got to be with the man who waited for 2,000 years to protect for her. So it is really hard to look at this and not say that the Ponds don't get a happy ending. Now, one of the things that I do have to go back to is, in terms of talking about this episode, is there's so much stuff in this story that just really doesn't make sense. Now, for example, the Doctor says he can't take the TARDIS back to 1938 New York and get Amy and Rory. Well, okay, could the Doctor take the TARDIS back to like 1938 Boston and just take a train down to New York and get Amy and Rory? I mean, all he would really need to do is have somebody keep an eye on the TARDIS for what? A day, two at the most? Literally, after I watched this episode yesterday, I was just turning this over in my head, and I've come up with like several ways that I think that reasonably the Doctor could get a hold of Amy and Rory again. But one, that's just not possible, because one, this is the end of the story for the Ponds. All right, the actors are going off to go on and do other things with their careers. No companion stays with the Doctor forever. And while and this really the story of the Ponds just needed an ending. And I think it's a bit of a disservice to the character of the Doctor to think that if there wasn't a way to do it, that he wouldn't. Now, as I said, these are just my own little ideas of what I think might work, and I think we just sort of have to accept that this is how the story of the Ponds ends. And I feel a little weird trying to hold, well, why doesn't the Doctor just do this against the show? Because in terms of maybe hardcore Vulcan logic, yes, if the Doctor were to say, go back to 1938 Boston and just take the train to New York, okay, yeah, maybe that would work. Or maybe he just goes back to New York in 1950s and picks the Ponds up 12 years later. Okay, again, that's all to me seems entirely possible that the Doctor could do that. But at the end of the day, Doctor Who is about telling a story, and stories have endings. And one, it's not a very good story if the Doctor and River spend 20 minutes just standing there throwing out scenarios about how the Doctor can maybe go and get Amy and Rory back. That's bookkeeping. That's continuity policing. That's just stuff that is not really interesting television. I mean, seriously, after about 3 minutes of this, people in the audience, like 99% of them, are like, okay, we get it. You can't save Amy and Rory. Just move on. So playing continuity police, or whatever you want to call it, and it's really expecting the show to spend real drama time on stuff that ultimately is just not vital to the story. I think on a storytelling level, we just have to let that go. It's what's necessary for the story. And now, granted, this is a very, very fine line for a show or a story or whatever you want to walk. And if you've watched some of my other reviews, I've come down very hard on other shows for this sort of thing. But here, in this instance, I'm willing to give the show a pass. But I do so somewhat grudgingly, because ultimately I think this really could have been handled better. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. So, speaking of that scene where Amy and Rory get sent back in time, first, what happened to the Weeping Angel? And why didn't the Weeping Angel also send back River and the Doctor? I mean, the Doctor and River apparently just sort of... No, the Doctor even explicitly runs away. I mean, Doctor, there's a Weeping Angel in the cemetery in New York. Are you not going to do anything about that? Are you just going to leave this monster to roam around New York City and do horrible things to people? Thanks, Doctor. Screw you. Yeah. Sorry guys, I cannot forgive that. The angel is just completely forgotten as soon as the Doctor decides he needs to freak out emotionally about Amy not seeing Amy again, even though the angel is literally standing right in front of him. I mean, seriously, what happened to the Weeping Angel? And speaking of which, all right, Asylum of the Daleks. It's basically the Doctor apparently removes all record of him from the existence of the Daleks. Okay, given what we saw in that episode, that makes sense. But now, apparently, this somehow also removed all record of the Doctor from records everywhere, throughout the galaxy and time, or like whatever. Okay, how the heck does that work? And second of all, doesn't anyone have like hard copies? I mean, are there no books or stone tablets? It's like, oh yeah, there's this dude called the Doctor, and he's a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, and he likes to dick with the Cybermen, and like, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And even then, that's just removing the existence of the Doctor from basically the cosmic internet. As soon as aren't people going to like, hey, wait a minute, why are there no records of the Doctor? Because I've heard all these stories about him, or like, hey, I met the Doctor one time, and he saved my planet from the Ice Warriors. Well, let me tell you all about it. Here, I'll put it up on my blog. I mean, seriously, it makes no sense whatsoever, and just sort of, gives the show another creature show, then another chance in the future to blatantly probably have somebody blatantly start screaming Doctor Who. It's like, ugh. And okay, if I heard this correctly, River at one point during this episode actually referred to herself as a psychopath. Now, River is apparently billed as a professor. A professor would, in my mind, know the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. And the very basic, and this is to the best of my understanding, the basic difference is this. A psychopath is someone who does terrible things because they don't know the difference between right and wrong. They literally do not understand the difference between right and wrong. A sociopath is someone who knows the difference between right and wrong and just doesn't care. I mean, if you've watched Sherlock even refers to himself as a high-functioning sociopath. Now, granted, Sherlock doesn't really go around and do evil things. He just goes around and acts like a humongous dick a lot of the times. I mean, somebody like House would probably qualify in many ways as a sociopath. But you know what? All I've got on in terms of my regard for this is Psych 101 from my college. So I'm really not going to harp too heavily on that, but I do know enough about it to say that people using that term, those two terms interchangeably, is something that I find kind of annoying. And I'm sure there's people out there who are probably better versed in psychology than I am, probably preparing to leave rather nasty comments in my channel right now. But okay, if I'm wrong, then fair enough. But I do think it only fair to say that while I don't mind people correcting me when I make mistakes, if you decide to be a dick about it, then I will simply remove your comments from the channel and make it so that you are not allowed to comment here anymore. So, if I'm wrong about the definition of sociopath and psychopath, please correct me, but let's all be civil about that. So, with that said, folks, overall, on an emotional level, and in terms of story, actually no, let's dial that back. In terms of emotions, I found this to be a very satisfying episode. It was a genuinely heartfelt and loving send-off to Amy and Rory, who are really some of the best companions in my mind that Doctor Who has easily ever had. They're definitely up there with characters like the second Romana and Jamie, certainly Sarah Jane Smith, Tegan, all the old-timey Doctor Who characters that I love. I will happily place Amy and Rory at the top tier of great Doctor companions. And this was a really great send-off for them. But that said, in terms of stuff in this story that just doesn't make any sense, this episode really piled it on. And frankly, I expect better from Doctor Who than this. But with that said, the end of Amy and Rory's era is here. We do know that there is another new companion coming along down the line, so I'm definitely looking forward to her. Certainly hoping to see some more of River this season. She's definitely a fun character, and always fun to see her and the Doctor together. And there's definitely, I think, more to be said about their relationship. Definitely got a big kick out of the Doctor primping to see his wife again. But that's all for the future. As always, folks, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Just remember, please be civil in your comments. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Immediately, as soon as these videos finish uploading to YouTube, I always tweet them. So if you want to be able to watch these videos as soon as humanly possible, then Twitter is the way to go. And with that said, folks, please take care and have a good one.